On her birthday, he humiliated her by announcing another woman in front of everyone. But when fate brings them back together at the same company years later, she finds herself in a position she never expected. In today's video, we'll uncover a gripping story of betrayal, resilience, and an encounter that no one saw coming. How does someone recover from such public humiliation? And what happens when they're forced to work with the person who caused it? Stay with us until the end to see how this emotional reunion takes an unpredictable turn. You'll be shocked by how this story unfolds.
That night in Dublin, O'Connell's pub was packed, and the loud music echoed off the brick walls, wrapping the room in laughter and conversations that warmed the atmosphere. Amelie moved between the tables, balancing trays of glasses, but her anxious gaze was always fixed on the door. Although she was there working, it was her birthday, and all she wanted was a special moment with Aidan, her boyfriend, who had promised to show up later. It had been 2 hours since their agreed-upon time, and with each passing minute, her anticipation grew. She wondered if he remembered how significant that day was for her. When Aidan finally appeared, wearing his leather jacket and flashing that charming smile, Amelie felt a mix of relief and joy. Trying to contain her excitement, she waved discreetly at him, but noticed he seemed distant, unlike what she had imagined. He gestured for her to wait and, without any explanation, climbed onto a chair, drawing the attention of everyone in the pub. The music seemed to fade, as if the very environment wanted to hear what Aidan had to say. With an expression Amelie didn't recognize, he draped an arm around a blonde woman who had seemingly appeared out of nowhere and spoke in a voice that reverberated through the bar. "Everyone, I want you to meet my new girlfriend." He raised his glass, toasting to the surprise that would leave Amelie breathless. With each word from Aidan, Amelie felt her face burn, as if the air had vanished and she was slowly sinking. She stood in shock, watching as he smiled next to the woman, while the laughter and applause from the crowd cut through her like tiny blades. The looks of pity and surprise directed at her were even worse. Aidan didn't glance at her even once during his announcement. To him, it seemed there was no trace of consideration. Amelie was paralyzed. She tried to maintain her composure, but her heart felt shattered. She swallowed hard, attempting to process what had just happened, but the laughter and whispers around her echoed like sharp knives. She realized that staying there would be unbearable. Without looking back, she left the tray on the bar, her hands still trembling, and hurried out into the night. As she crossed the pub's threshold, the chill of Dublin enveloped her completely. Cold wind brought a slight sense of life back into her body, but the pain was sharp, so intense it felt physical. Amelie leaned against a wall outside as if her entire body was about to collapse. With her gaze fixed on the ground and her chest tight, it felt as if the very air was trying to hurt her even more. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to expel the image of Aidan and that woman. Her head spun, and the tears that pooled in her eyes burned her cheeks. With each detail she recalled, Aidan's tone of voice, the way he completely disregarded her, the way others looked at her with pity, a sharp pain surged within her. It was as if all the effort, every moment spent with him, every night she awaited a message or a sign of affection, had turned to dust before everyone. That betrayal, so public, seemed to have destroyed the last vestige of self-worth she had left. But something within her began to shift. Amelie forced herself to take a deep breath as the cold wind brought a certain comfort, as if it were helping her awaken from a long nightmare. "This won't define me," she thought, feeling a spark of resistance ignite within her. The coldness in Aidan's voice, the indifference with which he belittled her, and that triumphant smile, as if he had accomplished something grand. All of it sparked something she had never felt so strongly before, a quiet yet intense anger. With her chest still trembling, Amelie wiped her tears and lifted her head, her eyes resolute. At that moment, she made a promise to herself, one that would be her anchor. She would never, ever allow anyone to make her feel that way again. She would be stronger, more determined. And deep in her pain, a resolve was born. From now on, no one would put her in that place of humiliation again. This pain would fuel something much greater. Back in her small apartment in downtown Dublin, Amelie closed the door and leaned against it, letting the silence invade the space. The thin walls were adorned with a few simple paintings and books, but what stood out was the simplicity of the area, reflecting her life up to that point, focused on studying, working, and building a future. But now, all of that felt suffocating. She took a step into the center of the room and, with a sudden impulse, opened the window to let the cold air in. Unsure of what to do, her eyes landed on the study table where an old notebook lay, one she often used for notes and study plans. Slowly, she approached it, picked up the notebook, and sat at the desk as if writing might help her process that pain. Grabbing a pen, she hesitated for a moment as the night's chill made her shiver slightly. The first word she wrote was never. From there, sentences began to flow with an unexpected firmness. I will never again allow someone to humiliate me. I will never depend on anyone's approval. I will become someone respected and unshakable. Amelie's hand was steady, and each word felt like a release, a way to unload the overwhelming emotion that filled her completely. Right there, on that page, a promise emerged that she would do everything to fulfill. She paused her writing and stared at the words, feeling their weight and strength. It wasn't just a declaration of independence. It was a promise that she would become someone far greater than Aiden could ever imagine. As the words echoed in her mind, she felt the first wave of calm wash over her. For the first time, it seemed she had a clear direction. No matter how long it took, she would do everything to transform, to become a version of herself that no one could belittle or ignore. From that moment on, Amelie felt her life would take a different path. Each time she looked at those words, she would remember the cold night when she was humiliated and the promises that birthed a new version of herself. Without knowing how or when, she only knew that one day Aiden would see the woman she would become. That promise was now what mattered most. Amelie's promise was made, but would she be able to fulfill this transformation? And what would life still hold for her along this path that had begun so abruptly? 2 years had passed since that night in Dublin, but Amelie still felt the vivid memory like a scar. However, it was a mark she had chosen to carry, not to dwell on the pain, but to remember the promise she made to herself that night. Now, at 24 years old, she was studying business administration and working tirelessly at a multinational company in Dublin, where she had secured a highly sought-after internship. If back then she was just a heartbroken girl, today she was a focused and determined professional. Amelie arrived at the Global Dynamics building every day before the sun rose. The imposing glass and concrete structure seemed even more monumental at 5 in the morning, when the city's silence contrasted with the usually bustling streets. Each day, her routine began with preparing detailed reports, reviewing contracts, and tackling tasks that other interns would find exhausting. For her, every small challenge was a brick in the construction of something much larger. The world around her mattered little. Her sole focus was to grow in her career and demonstrate that she deserved respect. She practically lived for work and studies. Her nights were dedicated to absorbing as much knowledge as possible, reviewing materials, and studying beyond what her courses required. Amelie knew that her dedication set her apart from the others, but that was not why she persisted. Every well-done task, every meticulous observation she included in a report was part of her promise. She would be someone strong, someone impossible to overlook, and no one ever again would take away her worth. This obsession with excellence began to attract the attention of her superiors. In weekly meetings, it was common for someone to comment on the precision of her work and the confidence her quiet presence exuded. Amelie never responded, maintaining a serene and focused expression. The image of the serious young woman who seemed to be a step ahead of her colleagues made her a favorite among several directors. To them, it was clear that Amelie was more than just an intern. She was someone who would soon occupy more significant positions. One day, while finishing up a report before an important meeting, Amelie received an unexpected email. It was an invitation from the board to attend a meeting with all department heads. It was a rare opportunity for an intern, and she knew immediately that something significant would happen there. At the scheduled time, she walked through the hallways, maintaining an upright posture and an air of calm. Upon entering the conference room, her eyes quickly caught the company director, Mr. O'Sullivan, who was observing the employees with a rigid and attentive expression. He was known for being demanding, someone who recognized talent but had little patience for mistakes. The meeting began, and Emily listened intently to discussions about goals, challenges, and the need to improve efficiency. At one point, Mr. O'Sullivan interrupted the topics and, looking directly at her, said in a firm voice, "Before we proceed, I would like to make a recognition." The entire room turned to Amélie, who tried to mask her slight astonishment. Amélie Deneuve, our business administration intern, has demonstrated an organizational ability and precision that exceeds expectations. Your work on the financial report analysis projects, even as a newcomer, has made a significant difference. On behalf of the company, I thank you for your dedication. Amélie felt her face flush slightly, but maintained her composure. She simply nodded without smiling too much, but deep inside, a silent pride was growing. Every sleepless night, every hour of effort, and every decision to forego leisure time to focus on her objectives seemed to have been worth it. The recognition in front of everyone was proof that she was on the right path. She knew it was just the beginning, but she confirmed to herself in thought, "I will achieve much more." Soon after, Mr. O'Sullivan resumed the meeting and, to Amelie's surprise, announced that there was a new position for a management assistant open and they would like to promote her. Amélie had to contain her reaction, but internally, a wave of joy and relief washed over her. She accepted the new role with gratitude, keeping a formal tone, and realized that from that moment on, the expectations placed on her would be even higher. She was more than ready for the challenge. At the end of the meeting, Mr. O'Sullivan asked Amélie to stay a bit longer. Everyone else had already left the room when he called her closer, indicating the chair beside him. There was a thoughtful expression on his face, something that made her prepare for something unexpected. He leaned slightly forward, clasping his hands, and began in a lower tone. "Amélie, I know I'm asking a lot of you with this promotion, but there's something else I want to discuss." Amélie nodded, curious. O'Sullivan continued, "We are opening a new branch in London, and we're looking to build a strong team from the ground up. This would be an opportunity for you to grow faster and work in a new environment. But of course, in this case, you wouldn't just be a management assistant. The idea is for you to take on a larger leadership role with the autonomy to define processes and structure teams." She fell silent, absorbing each word. The idea of London was exciting, but she knew it would be a tremendous challenge that would require complete adaptation. However, more than any other feeling, what weighed heavily was the promise she had made to herself. London would be her chance to show her strength in a new setting where no one knew her, where she could reinvent herself and build an even more solid reputation. With a determined look, she replied, "I accept, Mr. O'Sullivan. I'm ready to give my best in London." He studied her expression for a moment and nodded with a slight approving smile. "You know, Amélie, I knew you were someone special from day one. I just didn't expect you to go so far so fast. Get ready because this change will be intense." As she left the room, Amélie felt the weight of that new responsibility, but also the freedom of a promising future. In that moment, she realized that leaving Dublin was more than just a professional decision. It was a chance to shed any remnants of the past and transform every painful memory into pure motivation. Walking through the building's corridors, each step seemed to carry her not just to London, but into a new life where she would finally be the woman she had always wanted to be, respected, unshakable, and completely independent. As she left the company building that night, she gazed at the Dublin sky and felt a mix of gratitude and nostalgia. She would be leaving soon, but she knew that the city and everything she had experienced there would always be a part of her story. London was the next destination. But what awaited her there?
If you're enjoying the story so far, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Your support is crucial for the growth of our channel, and it helps us bring you even more captivating stories. Now, let's continue with the next chapter.
The morning was overcast in London, and the humid weather felt heavier than usual on her first day at work. Emily arrived early at the branch office, a modern and minimalist building located in Canary Wharf, the financial hub of the city. With coffee in her left hand and a folder of documents in her right, her heart raced faster than she would like to admit. Despite her experience in Dublin, she felt a mix of excitement and anxiety about this new challenge. "This is a real fresh start," she murmured to herself as she walked up to the reception desk. After some initial instructions, Emily was escorted by an assistant through the corridors. She observed her surroundings closely. The pace was faster than in Dublin, the faces were new, but what struck her most was the almost impeccable organization. Everything had a precise rhythm in place, and she promised herself to maintain that standard. They passed several rooms until the assistant stopped at an auditorium, where an orientation for new employees was about to begin. Emily sat in one of the front rows, attentive to every detail as the operations manager explained the branch's goals. Suddenly, a movement at the back of the room caught her eye, diverting her attention. She barely had time to process what she saw before the surprise hit her like an avalanche. That face, the posture, the maintenance uniform, it was Aiden, right there, in the same place, in the same building. He stood still, with a tired expression and none of the confident spark that once captivated her. He saw her too, and the look in his eyes showed a mix of shock and discomfort that only intensified her own feelings. For a brief moment, their gazes locked, as if time had stopped. Emily felt the old humiliation burning in her chest, but she didn't look away. The following seconds were tense. She noticed Aiden hesitated as if he wanted to approach, but her gaze, firm and expressionless, kept him in place. That cold, distant look didn't allow for any approach, and he seemed to understand that. In the next instant, he averted his gaze, focusing on the maintenance materials he carried, and walked away. Emily let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding, feeling the mix of anger and shock start to give way to a calm control. It was her first day, and nothing would make her lose focus on her new beginning. The workday passed in a whirlwind of information and introductions. Emily absorbed every detail about the team, the operations, and her superior's expectations, maintaining an impeccable and attentive posture. However, the image of Aiden in his simple uniform lingered in the back of her mind. She refused to acknowledge the emotional weight that unexpected reunion carried. "It doesn't matter. He's just an employee now. He's irrelevant," she repeated mentally, trying to push away the remnants of the past. At the end of the workday, Emily organized the papers on her desk, already planning her tasks for the next day, when she heard hesitant footsteps approaching. She looked up and, with a twinge of frustration and discomfort, saw that it was Aiden. He stood there, lingering in the doorway, his expression a mix of embarrassment and nervousness. She met his gaze, her expression impassive, maintaining her firm stance. He took a deep breath before speaking, his voice quieter than she remembered. "Emily, I didn't expect to see you here. London is big, isn't it? And life has its surprises, I guess." His attempt at sounding casual felt forced, and the discomfort was evident. He searched her face for any sign of openness, but found only a cold, controlled expression. "Yes, London is big," she replied, her tone sharp, offering no smile or extra words. "But for me, the past is in Dublin." With those words, she turned away, signaling that there was no room for nostalgia or reconciliation. He didn't respond, standing still for a few seconds as if waiting for a second chance. But Emily had already returned to organizing the papers, completely ignoring him. The tension in the air was palpable. Finally, Aiden gave up trying to speak and left in silence. When he exited, Emily continued her work, but her apparent coldness masked a whirlwind of emotions. She thought she had moved on, that she was immune to his presence, but seeing Aiden again in such a different condition had shaken her in an unexpected way. That night, back in her small, organized apartment in Chelsea, Emily reviewed documents for new employees, a necessary procedure to familiarize herself with the team. The stack of folders on the dining table seemed endless, but she enjoyed going through each detail, ensuring she wouldn't overlook anything in her new role as assistant manager. It was a way to reaffirm to herself that she was there on her own merit, that every advancement was the result of her effort. As she made her way through the list, her eyes landed on a folder labeled Aiden Murphy. The name struck her like a blow, but she remained still, staring at the cover of the document. She couldn't ignore it. That was one of the folders she needed to evaluate. Taking a deep breath, she tried not to let the tension in her chest show and opened the file. His name on the paper felt like a cruel reminder of the past. As she skimmed through the history, she discovered that Aiden had started at the company a few months before her, hired as a temporary employee in the maintenance department with a contract nearing expiration. His renewal depended on an evaluation. She leaned back in her chair, her heart racing. The decision about his future at the company was in her hands. It was an irony that life placed before her, the opportunity to determine the fate of someone who had once humiliated her and made her doubt herself. A bitter thought crossed her mind. She could, with a signature, undo whatever stability he had left. It would take nothing more than not renewing his contract. Would that be an act of justice? However, a voice inside her made her hesitate. The professional she had become, the woman who had overcome her past insecurities, wouldn't make a decision based solely on revenge. She struggled to breathe and finally closed the folder, feeling the weight of a responsibility she never imagined having. Emily knew she needed to think clearly, and any hasty decision would lead her down a path she had promised herself to avoid, letting the past interfere with her choices. She set the folder aside, leaned back in her chair, and closed her eyes, trying to clear her mind. It felt strange, but now the image of Aiden was a reminder that she was in a position of control that once seemed unattainable. A part of her still wanted revenge, but another part, the part she knew was stronger, wanted to move forward with dignity, showing him that she had become someone he could never destroy. Tomorrow she would decide. She knew that choice would mark a new direction, but whatever it was, it would make it clear that she had, at last, overcome. The days following the reunion with Aiden were, for Amelie, a series of tests of patience and self-control. His presence, though discreet in the maintenance department, seemed to follow her every step, like a shadow from the past. She kept her focus on her work, completing each task with the excellence that had always been her hallmark, but rumors began to swirl through the hallways of the branch. Amelie noticed the hushed conversations, the sidelong glances that avoided hers, but she never paused to try to understand. It wasn't until she delivered a report to a colleague that she overheard a stray comment that made her freeze for a moment. She traded him for a position, poor guy. The words hung in the air, dripping with venom. Amelie pretended not to hear, but her heart raced. Where had that absurd story come from? By the end of the day, during a routine meeting, she sensed some furtive glances and whispers that were slowly taking shape. There was a narrative brewing, and Amelie soon discovered who the narrator was. As she crossed paths with two colleagues on her way out, she overheard Aiden's name mentioned with a note of pity, and her stomach churned. It was him, of course. Gradually, the story he seemed to be telling in the background was unfolding. He, the abandoned boyfriend of an ambitious woman who had traded him to climb the career ladder. A redemption story where he was the victim. That infuriated her. Not only was it a blatant lie, but it threatened the reputation she had built with so much sacrifice. The distorted version of the story between her and Aiden was gaining ground, and it seemed that the image of dedication she valued so highly was at risk. Controlling the impulse to confront him right then and there in the office, she decided she needed to stay focused. She would not allow him to destabilize her, but the situation was already beginning to slip out of her control. The following week, an extraordinary meeting was called. Emily felt a weight on her chest as she made her way to the conference room where the branch's top managers awaited. Upon entering, she sensed the serious atmosphere and, for a moment, thought this might be an opportunity to clarify the truth. But when she saw the grave expression on her direct supervisor's face, she knew it wouldn't be so simple. Emily, we would like to discuss some comments that have reached our ears, her boss said straightforwardly, without preamble. The others present wore rigid and somewhat uncomfortable expressions. She took a deep breath, maintaining a firm posture as he continued. There is a perception circulating among some colleagues that your rise may have involved unresolved personal issues, which is creating a, let's say, unstable atmosphere in the team. Emily swallowed hard. It was evident that Aiden had planted the seeds, and now they were growing in a way that threatened to destroy everything she had worked for. I'm not sure exactly what was said, but I assure you that I have always kept my focus on my work and my competence, she began, her voice steady, but realizing the situation was more serious than she had imagined. I joined this company with the intent of building a solid and honest career. She hesitated for a moment before continuing. I will not allow rumors to diminish the value of my work. Her boss nodded, but there was a look of caution on his face. It was a test. She knew that. And what was at stake was her name, her entire trajectory. In an effort to demonstrate her dedication further, Emily asked to speak and defended each project in which she had excelled. Her voice, though controlled, carried the weight of someone who was not willing to back down. One by one, her colleagues avoided looking at her, but her boss maintained a steady gaze. He wanted to see how far she would go. When she finished, the silence was absolute. Her boss watched her for a long moment before nodding, as if he had reached a conclusion. Thank you, Emily. We will continue to assess the situation. She knew at that moment that he expected more than just words. She would need to take action to prove that those rumors were unfounded. What remained for her now was to address the problem at its root. Determined to resolve the situation once and for all, Emily waited until the end of the workday and sought out Aiden. She found him in the maintenance department, where he was alone, checking some tools. When he saw her approach, he froze for a moment, probably not expecting her to confront him directly, but Emily was not there for niceties, not anymore. "We need to talk," she said, her voice low but filled with authority. He looked at her with a mix of surprise and discomfort. "I'm hearing various stories about our past, stories that, curiously, only favor you." Aiden's expression shifted, going from surprise to a poorly disguised attempt at innocence. I never meant to cause you problems, Emily. People ask, and I just tell them what happened." He shrugged, as if he were a victim of a situation he had created. "Just tell them what happened," she repeated, stepping closer. "So, according to you, I abandoned you for ambition, is that it? Because that's the version that's circulating." She stared him down, and for a moment he seemed to waver, looking away. "This isn't about what happened, Aiden. It's about what you want people to think of me." Aiden sighed, trying for an expression of weariness. "Emily, I'm not trying to destroy your career. I just wanted people to know my version, you know?" She held back her anger, taking a deep breath before responding. "If you really want a chance to be respected, stop acting like you're in a competition with me," she said, her voice now firmer and more controlled. "Show your worth through your work, Aiden, not through lies and insinuations." She held his gaze, waiting for a response, a sign of understanding or remorse. But he remained silent, his face hardened, as if the truth hurt him more than he was willing to admit. Emily realized there was nothing more to say. He understood the message, and now it was up to him. She walked out of the maintenance department with a sense of relief, knowing she'd made it clear that she would not be manipulated. However, she still wondered, would he change? Emily barely had time to process her confrontation with Aiden in the maintenance department before the situation escalated further. 2 days later, a critical failure in the electrical system of a production line shut the factory down completely, interrupting a crucial safety automation project that, if delayed, could put the entire branch in serious trouble. What began as a technical problem quickly evolved into a crisis when a department head casually mentioned to Emily that Aiden was on the maintenance team assigned to the last inspection of the panels before the failure. That afternoon, Emily was called to an extraordinary meeting with the board of directors. Upon entering the conference room, she felt that something was different. The tension was almost palpable. Executives who rarely attended these meetings were present, exchanging stiff glances. At the center of the long glass table sat Aiden, already seated, his head down, his face pale and his hands trembling slightly. When he lifted his eyes and saw Amelie enter, panic flashed across his face, but he quickly averted his gaze as if wishing to disappear. Amelie took a seat at the opposite end of the table and waited for the meeting to begin. The operations director, Mr. Collins, started off directly. The failure that occurred this week compromised our deadlines and could impact our reputation. There are rumors that it was a maintenance error, and Aiden was on the team responsible for inspecting the panel before the problem. He looked directly at Aiden, who squirmed in his chair, clearly uncomfortable with the implicit accusation. Aiden, can you explain what happened? Aiden took a deep breath, visibly shaken, but tried to keep his voice steady. Mr. Collins, we conducted a thorough inspection, and all protocols were followed. The cables were intact, the connections, everything. I would never compromise the safety of the company. He cast a brief, pleading glance in Amelie's direction. She sensed the vulnerability in his words, and for a moment, the image of the confident Aiden she once knew seemed distant, replaced by someone scared and frightened. The board remained impassive. We understand your defense, Aiden, Collins said tersely. He then turned to Amelie. Amelie, as the branch manager, we trust your judgment. You know this employee's history. We need you to evaluate his position on the team, considering the impact this situation may have on the progress of our projects. Aiden seemed to shrink at those words, and Amelie felt the intensity of the situation escalate. She knew Aiden was depending on her, but the weight of responsibility on her shoulders made her hesitate. I need to understand the extent of the problem before making any final decisions, she replied, keeping her tone neutral. She knew she couldn't let personal emotions cloud her assessment, but still, Aiden's helpless look continued to echo in her mind. The next morning, all members involved in the inspection were called to a second meeting. The room was full, and the atmosphere was thick with tension. Colleagues who usually were friendly maintained serious expressions, with their eyes downcast and shoulders tense, as if each feared being called to account. Amelie observed everything closely, her mind restless. Finally, Aiden stood up to present his case. He seemed more anxious, but took a deep breath and began to speak, his voice trembling yet determined. I know that for many, my presence here is questionable because of the past, but I assure you that I would never compromise your safety or work. He looked at Amelie again, and in that moment, the facade of confidence he was trying to maintain began to crack. There are many variables in the maintenance process, many that are not always under the direct control of the team. I cannot assert what exactly caused the problem, but it was not due to a lack of care or effort. Amelie watched the exchanged glances among her colleagues, all awaiting her response. She felt a strange mix of anger, doubt, and compassion. On one hand, everything indicated that he was at the center of the failure. On the other, the emotion in his voice seemed sincere, and he appeared different from the man who had once used words to manipulate her. It was as if, for the first time, Aiden was defending himself with truth. But she also knew that a single word from her could end his contract, which would guarantee her a momentary peace, but would not resolve the dilemma she faced. Amelie maintained her composure, waiting to see how far he would go. I hope everyone here understands that my career and my life changed after what happened between me and Amelie. He paused, looking directly at her, and the weight of his gaze seemed to carry everything he had never said. I just want this to be a chance to start over. I wouldn't forgive myself if I lost everything for something I didn't do. Aiden glanced around the room again. The vulnerability he displayed was disconcerting and for some, incomprehensible. For Amelie, it was one of the few times he seemed genuinely honest. When the meeting ended, Amelie knew she needed answers before making any decisions. She quickly withdrew, avoiding eye contact with anyone, and returned to her office. She couldn't understand why this felt so complex, why Aiden's pleading look disturbed her so much. Determined to uncover what really happened, she decided to investigate every detail of the maintenance, cross-referencing information and system records. After hours of research and discreet conversations with other employees, she uncovered a peculiar trail in messages from one of Aiden's colleagues. The data indicated recent interference in the inspection system, suggesting that someone tampered with the records to manipulate the results. Emily paused, absorbing what she was seeing. This was not just an error, it was deliberate sabotage. With the new findings, she called the technician responsible and pressed him for answers. Under pressure, he eventually confessed. Fearing that Aiden might earn respect and even outshine him, he had tried to sabotage him to prevent him from proving his worth. Emily listened to the confession with a sense of disbelief and disgust. This whole situation, the doubt about Aiden, the judgment of his character, had all been manipulated. As she left the office, she found Aiden in the hallway, alone, lost in thought, as if waiting for a verdict he knew was inevitable. Upon seeing her approach, he straightened up, but his eyes reflected the tension he carried. Emily stopped in front of him, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. "I found out what happened," she began, her tone controlled. Aiden looked confused but remained silent. "You were sabotaged," she continued, and the surprise on his face was evident. He blinked, trying to process the information, while Emily maintained her firm gaze. "Someone thought that by harming you, they would prevent you from having a chance to prove yourself." The expression of relief mixed with pain in Aiden's eyes made him appear entirely different. He shook his head, a bitter smile forming. I don't know what to say," he murmured, his voice faltering. "I almost believed everything was lost, that you would never trust me again." Emily felt a tightness in her chest but remained calm. "This situation went beyond limits. I hope you understand that what happened here was more than any personal issue." She looked at him, feeling that somehow the bond between them had changed forever. He nodded, his eyes still reflecting an intense weight. As they parted in that hallway, Emily felt that a new chapter was being turned. But the question lingered. Now that he knew someone had tried to harm him, what would Aiden do to prove that he had truly changed? Emily felt a mix of indignation and relief as she prepared for the conversation with Tom, the employee who had sabotaged Aiden's work. The incident had revealed much more about the silent dynamics within the company than she was ready to admit. When Tom entered her office, Emily noticed he was nervous. His hands trembled and he barely made eye contact. "Tom, I want to be straightforward," she said, crossing her hands on the desk, her eyes fixed on him. "We found out that the system failure was caused by intentional interference." She paused, watching as he looked down at the floor, clearly uncomfortable. "And we know that this interference came from you." Tom looked at her, trying to suppress his anxiety. "Emily, I never intended to sabotage the project. I thought Aiden might end up messing things up, and I never imagined it would come to this," he stammered, carefully choosing his words as sweat began to trickle down his forehead. Emily continued to watch him without blinking, her voice steady but not hiding her disapproval. "Tom, I know you have ambitions and might have felt that Aiden was a threat to your space, but that doesn't justify what you did." Tom tried to respond, but she interrupted him. "And what about the damage this could cause to the company? To the other people who work here? That was a betrayal, Tom." Tom fell silent, ashamed. He knew there weren't enough excuses to justify his actions. Emily sighed, struggling against the urge to punish him severely. She could report the incident to the board, but she knew that could negatively impact the company and permanently tarnish Tom's image. However, the decision to spare him would not come without weight. "I will keep this incident confidential," Emily said, feeling the weight of her decision. "I won't expose you or compromise our team, but I suggest you reflect on your choices." She looked at him with a warning gaze. "Loyalty and integrity are all we have, Tom, and I hope I never have to call you in for a conversation like this again." He nodded quickly, his eyes wide with a mix of shame and relief. As he left the room, Tom's expression showed that he felt the weight of what he had done. Emily, on her part, felt relieved. By protecting Aiden, she also set aside any lingering desire for revenge or resentment. For a brief moment, she realized that in doing so, she was forgiving Aiden and freeing herself from part of the pain of the past. Shortly after concluding her meeting with Tom, Emily was walking down the hall, lost in thought, when she spotted Aiden near the coffee machine. He seemed distracted, but when he noticed her approaching, he straightened up and managed a shy smile, his eyes revealing a mix of gratitude and remorse. Emily walked over, unsure of what he would say, but willing to listen. "Emily, I heard you dealt with the problem," he began hesitantly, but the sincerity in his voice was undeniable. "I don't know how to thank you. I never imagined you would act like that. To be honest, I thought, well, that you might use this against me." He laughed awkwardly, but the vulnerability in his gaze was evident. She smiled softly, a smile that conveyed more understanding than any words could express. "I understand that things between us have never been easy, Aiden, and I also thought I could never forgive you, but somehow I realized that this is important, both for me and for you." The words came out spontaneously, and Emily felt lighter with each one. Aiden watched her, unblinking, as if absorbing the depth of her words. "I never believed I deserved a second chance. After everything I did, I thought the only way forward was, I don't know, to run away, to keep hiding." His voice faltered, and he looked down for a moment, clenching his hands. "We all have the chance to do better," Emily said, her voice now softer. "This second chance is there for everyone. What you do with it is what truly matters." She briefly placed her hand on his shoulder, a gesture symbolizing both the strength and the forgiveness she wanted to convey. Aiden raised his gaze, and the emotion in his eyes made her realize how much he had changed. "Thank you, Emily," he said, almost in a whisper. "You've given me much more than I deserved, and I don't say this just because of the work. I mean for what you've done for me as a person. I thought you'd never forgive me." Emily recognized a sincerity that she hadn't seen in a long time, and the conviction in his voice touched her deeply. She felt that perhaps this was the last piece she needed to fully move on herself. A few days later, Aiden asked to speak with Emily privately, and she welcomed him into her office. He entered with a serious expression but seemed calm, almost as if he was ready for a definitive decision. Emily watched as he sat down across from her, the silence between them carrying palpable tension. "I believe it's time for me to move on," he said, surprising her. "I'm thinking about leaving the company." He paused briefly, as if trying to organize his thoughts. "I realize that in order to truly change and become someone worthy of what you did for me, I need a fresh start. Somewhere else." The revelation caught her off guard. She studied his face, recognizing the sincerity and the weight of that decision. Emily knew this wasn't just about work. That departure was proof that Aiden was genuinely committed to transforming his life, regardless of where he was. "Are you sure about this, Aiden?" she asked, her voice softer than she intended. He nodded, with a smile that mixed sadness and determination. "I need to build something for myself, without my past or my failures shadowing every step. And Emily, I know you've given me more than I ever asked for, but I need to do this. I need to know that I can start anew." Emily felt a wave of emotion hearing this. She knew that this decision came from a maturity he had never shown before. She felt proud of him, something she had never imagined possible. "If this is your choice, then I can only support you," she said, with an encouraging smile. "But know that for me, you will always have this second chance." Aiden lowered his head, absorbing her words with a look of gratitude. "Thank you for believing that I could be better," he murmured. He looked around the office, perhaps for the last time, as someone saying goodbye to an important phase of life. Emily felt that this was truly the farewell they both needed, one that left no resentment or regrets. When he left the room, Emily stared at the door for a moment, feeling that something profoundly transformative had occurred. There was a new peace within her, and as she watched his figure retreat down the hall, she knew that this goodbye was a fresh start for both of them. At the end of that day, Emily felt that a page was turning, not just for Aiden, but for her own story. In the quiet of the night, she reflected on the journey they had both taken, how much they had changed, and what was still to come.
Thanks for watching. If you haven't yet, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Every bit of support really makes a difference for our channel. Now let's dive back into the story.
The weeks that followed Aiden's decision were marked by a silent yet profound change in the company environment. Shortly after he announced his departure, something different took hold among the employees. Emily observed, always from a distance, how Aiden's demeanor seemed more determined and professional than ever. Every task he took on was executed with meticulous attention that didn't go unnoticed. People whispered among themselves, remarking on the almost incomprehensible transformation that had overtaken him. Aiden no longer mentioned the past or left room for gossip. It was as if he had decided that nothing, absolutely nothing, would distract him from the mission that now kept him focused. Emily, always busy with meetings and reports, still managed to reserve a few moments of her day to watch him from afar. Inside her, a complex feeling of pride and nostalgia intertwined. There was a touch of melancholy in seeing Aiden dedicate himself so fully, knowing he was about to leave for good. That morning, while Emily analyzed documents for a new project, she overheard voices near the office discussing Aiden. "It's like he's completely transformed," someone said. "The guy is working with an intensity I've never seen before." Another colleague nodded, surprised. Now it feels like we're really going to lose someone important." Those words echoed in Emily's mind. She wondered if Aiden knew the effect he had on his colleagues, the impact he would leave behind. Even if no one realized it, he was doing something remarkable, reclaiming his dignity in everyone's eyes, closing a chapter that, deep down, she also needed to close. Emily forced herself to focus on her work again, but out of the corner of her eye she spied the corridor. With each gesture and action of his, the realization grew within her that Aiden was finally ready to restart his life. In the final week of Aiden's time at the company, an emergency situation arose in the maintenance department. The main monitoring system suffered a sudden failure, threatening to halt an entire production line and severely impact the delivery schedule. Upon hearing about the incident, Emily rushed to the control room, where she found a tense atmosphere and employees on high alert, uncertain about what to do. Aiden was already there, alongside the other technicians. He appeared completely absorbed in the situation, analyzing the systems and screens with a calm, focused expression. Contrary to what Emily expected, he didn't seem nervous or anxious, but rather determined to resolve the issue. Instead of acting alone, Aiden called two of the technicians over and quickly explained a possible solution with confidence. He delegated responsibilities, patiently outlining the necessary steps to fix the system. The other technicians watched him with a contained admiration. With agility, Aiden pointed out a series of specific adjustments on the control panel, and working together, the team followed his instructions. In less than 30 minutes, the problem was resolved. The system was back online, and the collective sigh of relief was instant. Colleagues exchanged glances, clearly impressed, with some even patting Aiden on the back. Emily watched the scene from a distance, her heart heavy and her gaze fixed on him. Seeing him act with such precision and efficacy filled her with intense pride, but also a certain sadness. She realized that no matter how many difficult moments they had shared, the trust and respect he was finally earning were genuine and well-deserved. She recognized that he had shown a quiet strength that many didn't even know existed, and she felt grateful to have allowed him this last chance for redemption. Still observing the team as they dispersed, she slowly approached, maintaining a neutral expression, trying not to reveal the mix of emotions that overwhelmed her. Aiden, noticing her presence, straightened up, keeping a respectful posture, devoid of the arrogance he once had. In that moment, he seemed like a completely new person. At the end of the workday, Aiden asked to speak with Emily privately. She agreed, and they walked together to the empty meeting room, where the silence amplified the significance of the moment. They sat across from each other, and Emily waited as he appeared to organize his thoughts, searching for the right words to begin. "Emily," he said, his tone conveying both gratitude and a hint of sadness, "I wanted to thank you for the opportunity you gave me, for not judging me by who I was, but by who I can become." He paused, and for the first time, Amelie noticed a shimmer of emotion in his eyes. The truth is, I've accepted a job offer in another city. I'll be working on a new project where I can start over without anyone knowing me and without my past defining me. Amelie felt a tightness in her chest. Although she knew he would move forward, hearing those words brought a new layer of reality to the fact that he wouldn't be around anymore. The feeling of loss caught her off guard, but she kept her composure. I'm happy for you, Aiden. I know how much this means to someone who's truly willing to change, she said, with a light but sincere smile. I needed this fresh start, he continued, his voice wavering slightly. The time I spent here, especially in the last few months, showed me that it's possible to be better, that I don't have to be tied to who I was, and you were a big part of that. He extended his hand to her, a simple gesture but laden with meaning. Amelie hesitated for a second but shook his hand, feeling the connection that was finally grounded in mutual respect and understanding. She wanted to say so many things, but she knew that no words could do justice to what they had both experienced. So she opted for the essential. I believe you will do great things, Aiden, and I hope you continue to show who you really are. The handshake was firm, but the farewell was inevitable. As they released their hands, he looked at her one last time with a mix of gratitude and respect before standing up to leave. Amelie found herself alone in the room, feeling the intensity of a cycle that had, at last, come to a close. Watching him walk down the corridor and disappear through the door, she realized that forgiveness, once distant and unthinkable, had become a reality, and with it, a sense of peace enveloped her. The past few weeks had shown Amelie something she never imagined possible, reconciliation with the past. And although she knew that a reunion with Aiden might never occur again, she felt that every step he took from then on would reflect that final conversation. The days passed with a serenity that Amelie could hardly remember feeling for a long time. At the office, a calmness enveloped her every time she saw Aiden, dedicated to his work in the last days at the company. He moved through the building with a tranquility that seemed inconceivable when she thought of the young man from years ago, always exuding arrogance and self-sufficiency. This Aiden was different, discreet, careful, almost humble. Watching him, Amelie noticed how even their colleagues seemed to gravitate toward him, intrigued by his ideas and respectful of his experience. The transformation was evident, and it made her reflect on time and what it had done to both of them. One afternoon, after finishing a report, Amelie found herself gazing out the window of her office, lost in thought. Suddenly, her mind traveled back to the past, to the beginning of it all. The years spent with Aiden, the mistakes, the hurts, the words that could never be erased. She remembered well how he had fueled her insecurity back then. Her ambition had been a threat in Aiden's eyes, and he didn't hesitate to belittle her. At that time, Amelie had let his influence sway her, questioning her own abilities and suppressing the desire to move forward. But now, looking at that man walking through the corridors, she saw that he was no longer the one who had left her heartbroken and her self-esteem in tatters. This Aiden seemed like a man aware of his own mistakes, someone who now understood the value of respect and, above all, forgiveness. Amelie took a deep breath, feeling something within her also healing as she recognized him this way, as if she were finally freeing herself from an old pain. The next day, when she crossed paths with him in a hallway, Amelie greeted him with a smile that blended nostalgia and gratitude. He returned it with an equally serene gaze. In those last days, she realized that the past, although present in her memories, no longer held the same weight. The Aiden who had once caused her tears was now a distant reflection, and that gave her a strange but welcome sense of peace. On the eve of his departure, Aiden asked to have one last conversation alone with Amelie. They met at the end of the workday when silence enveloped the building. The meeting room was empty and dark, illuminated only by the soft glow of the city outside. Amelie entered and found Aiden already seated with an introspective expression, as if he had finally decided to say something he had postponed for a long time. She sat across from him, waiting in silence. Aiden took a deep breath, looking at his hands for a moment before raising his eyes to meet hers directly. Emily, if I could turn back time, I would change so many things, he began, his voice almost wavering, as if he wasn't sure his words could express everything he felt. I never knew what it truly meant to love someone, not until I lost you and saw how much you grew while I fell behind. His confession echoed in the room, and Emily felt a wave of surprise and sadness. She remained silent, allowing him to speak, but his words struck deep. The Aiden she once knew would never have admitted this, would never have allowed pride to be overcome by vulnerability. But now, seeing him there, his face marked by the weight of experiences, she felt he was speaking the truth. This was a raw truth, without excuses. It was the honesty she had longed for over the years. I know I was wrong, that I let my insecurity hurt you, and it was selfish, so selfish. I wanted you to forgive me, but I never had the courage to ask. He averted his gaze, his eyes glistening, trying to compose himself, but his emotions were close to the surface. Emily held his hand for a moment, a gesture of comfort that wasn't planned but felt right. Aiden, she said, her voice low and firm, I've carried that hurt for a long time too, but now I realize that holding on to resentment only keeps us stuck. In the end, we need to leave the past where it belongs. Emily hadn't planned to say those words, but she felt relieved to express them, as if she had finally found peace in their entire story. The two looked at each other in silence for a few moments, as if sealing an invisible pact. Aiden, with a slight smile of gratitude, squeezed her hand gently before letting it go. They both knew that moment wouldn't repeat itself, but it was the kind of goodbye that brought genuine closure. Deep down, they understood that, even if they took different paths, each would carry a piece of the other forever. The next day, Aiden's last at the company, he appeared in Emily's office early with a serene expression and a small folded letter in his hands. Without saying a word, he handed the letter to her, which, a bit surprised, she took with care. There was something intimate about that gesture, as if he were offering a part of himself that he rarely showed. I wrote this last night, he explained, trying to keep his voice steady. I thought it would be important for you to know what all of this meant to me. Aiden couldn't hide his emotion, and Emily noticed the moist glimmer in his eyes. He took a deep breath, looking away to hold back his tears. Thank you for everything, Emily, for giving me a chance when I didn't even know if I deserved one. Emily nodded, holding the letter without opening it right away. She knew that when she was alone, those words would carry even more weight. She watched him give one last nod before walking away, and as she saw him go, she felt a deep mix of sadness and relief. It was the end of a cycle. They had both followed different paths, but that last meeting was the perfect closure for a chapter that had intensely shaped them. When she opened the letter later in her office, Emily read Aiden's simple yet sincere words. I've never been perfect, but thanks to you, I learned to try. Thank you for believing I could be better. I will carry this lesson with me wherever I go. Emily allowed herself to smile, and a tear escaped, carrying with it all the weight she had held for so long. As the clock marked the end of the workday, Emily felt that something within her had changed forever. That goodbye not only left a sense of closure, but also opened the door for new beginnings. After Aiden's departure, the days in the office felt oddly quiet for Emily. She noticed his absence in small details, the coffee he always insisted on brewing in the morning, and the hallway where he exchanged friendly glances with colleagues. This absence left an unexpected mark. To her surprise, it didn't take long for the management to offer her a transfer opportunity to the U.S. branch. The proposal was tempting and came at a moment when Amélie, for the first time, felt truly at peace. The idea of starting anew on another continent, free from the weight of the past and with new possibilities ahead, seemed like the missing step to completing the transformation she had been building. Determined to move forward, Amélie accepted the invitation. Her transfer was the final sign that a cycle was closing, and this would be her last month in London. On the day of her farewell meeting, the office buzzed with more activity than usual, and she felt the atmosphere of curiosity and admiration among her colleagues. Many viewed her as someone who had overcome internal and external challenges, someone who had earned respect and empathy despite difficulties. Emily prepared for her final speech, determined to share something authentic. As she began to speak, the attentive faces around her made her feel enveloped in an energy of respect and camaraderie. "These years in London have been transformative," she started, with a smile carrying a subtle nostalgia. "I've learned so much from each of you, and every experience has helped me grow. More than a professional journey, it has been a journey of personal overcoming." She paused, feeling the weight of her words. "I learned that the past, no matter how difficult, can strengthen us, and that forgiving can be the most liberating thing there is." The silence in the room was profound. Many colleagues, inspired, looked at her with admiration. Some were moved to tears, perhaps feeling that those words carried a weight greater than a simple farewell. When Amelie concluded, a wave of applause filled the room. Colleagues approached her, offering hugs and words of affection and gratitude. She realized that, like Aiden, she had left her mark there. A sense of lightness settled in her chest. That goodbye represented far more than a professional farewell. As she collected the last items from her desk, Amelie found a small white envelope. She hadn't expected anything more, but there it was, discreetly, an envelope with her name, no sender noted. Intrigued, she opened it and found an old photograph. It was from a gathering years ago where she and Aiden stood side by side, smiling, before everything changed between them. Along with the photo was a small handwritten note. "May each step be a new beginning. Thank you for believing in me." Emily stood still for a moment, absorbing the significance of it. The photo was a reflection of a lost time, but the message held something new, a confirmation that everything they had lived had a purpose. She allowed herself to smile, for there was a reminder that, even with the scars, there was also learning and growth. It was a silent and genuine farewell, requiring no further explanation. Tears streamed down her face, but they were tears of peace. The image in her hands did not represent the painful past, but rather a symbol of what they both had become after so many trials. It was, in truth, a reminder of a bond that, even if broken, had left her with a profound lesson about forgiveness and transformation. She carefully tucked the photo into her bag, knowing that, in some way, Aiden wanted her to carry a positive memory, something that symbolized the best of both of them. As she left the building for the last time, Amelie walked slowly, allowing herself to feel each step as a farewell to the city that had shaped so much of who she was. The cool London breeze blew gently, and she looked around, soaking in every detail of the landscape. It was a definitive goodbye, yet at the same time a new beginning. Suddenly, she felt her phone vibrate. It was a message from an unknown number, but the content took her by surprise. "You have always been stronger than you believed. May the next stage of your journey be as amazing as you are." Amelie froze, her heart racing as she processed those words. Though the number wasn't saved, she knew who it was. That farewell felt like a silent blessing, an affirmation that they were both, in their own ways, free to move on. Holding her phone close to her heart, Amelie allowed herself to smile once more. The chapter was truly closed, with loose ends tied, and each pain transformed into a lesson. Aiden's message, short and direct, was everything she needed to move forward in peace. And as she got into the taxi that would take her to the airport, she looked back one last time, knowing that everything she had experienced there was what had made her stronger. As the plane took off toward the United States, Amelie finally felt ready to start anew, with a renewed sense of freedom and purpose. 2 years had passed since Amelie left London to start a new life in the United States. On that cold winter morning in New York, she was waiting for her friend at a cozy cafe in the West Village, reviewing notes for an important meeting. The place was tranquil, with soft music playing in the background, and the aroma of fresh coffee wrapped around her in a comforting embrace. Sitting near the window, she allowed herself a moment of contemplation, reflecting on how much her life had changed since then. Amelie was so absorbed in her thoughts that she only noticed someone beside her when she heard her name being softly yet unmistakably pronounced. She looked up, curious, and her heart skipped a beat. It was Aiden. He stood there, smiling lightly yet meaningfully. Emily blinked in surprise, unable to hide her reaction at seeing him so far from London. "Aiden," she murmured, still processing the scene. He seemed different. His posture was straighter, his gaze calm, and the features of his face were marked by time, now reflecting a confidence she had never seen before. "I didn't expect to find you so far from London," he said, his voice serene, conveying a mature sincerity. Emily smiled back, sensing a profound change in his tone. The same tone that once carried restlessness now sounded secure and calm. He invited her to sit at a more secluded table so they could talk without interruptions. She accepted, still processing the unexpected reunion. Aiden had changed, and the change was palpable, a new feeling that seemed to bring everything to the surface in a way that no longer hurt. Sitting across from him, Amelie realized that the man before her was not the same one she had left behind in London 2 years ago. As they sat, the first few minutes were filled with casual conversation about New York and their routines. But soon, the tone deepened. Aiden leaned slightly over the table, his eyes shining with a mix of vulnerability and pride as he began to share his journey since leaving London. "These past 2 years have been intense, Emily," he started, pausing to indicate the weight of each word. "It was the first time I was really alone, without anyone to blame for my mistakes, without excuses to run away from responsibility." He revealed that he had taken jobs in various cities, moving frequently, without roots, and that each experience forced him to confront who he truly was. He spoke of moments of doubt, of days when he felt lost and without perspective. Emily listened intently, feeling the intensity of what he shared. Each word seemed to reflect a profound truth, a journey of redemption he had built with effort and humility. "Those days in London taught me about respect, but also about starting over," he continued, averting his gaze for a moment, as if the memories were difficult to face. "But it wasn't just for me, you know. I needed to be worthy of someone like you." His words echoed in Amelie's mind, causing her heart to race. She never imagined hearing something like that from Aiden, and those words, so simple yet laden with sincerity, made her realize the depth of his transformation. She understood that he had truly found the way to his own redemption. For the first time, Amelie comprehended that everything they had lived through, all the pain and mistakes, brought them to that moment, at that cafe in New York, where he sat before her, more transparent and authentic than he had ever been. The feeling of peace began to settle in her as she saw that Aiden's journey had genuinely transformed him. Their conversation flowed easily and intimately, as if they had never been apart. Emily felt a sense of familiarity mixed with something new. It was as if she was getting to know Aiden for the first time, but now under a softer and more honest light. They talked about dreams, plans, and how life had changed them. With a gleam in his eye, Aiden shared that he planned to settle in a small town where he could open his own workshop. It was a modest endeavor, but he described it with such enthusiasm that Amelie could almost visualize every detail. "A place to truly start over," he said, smiling. Amelie found herself admiring his determination, realizing how different the Aiden of now was from the man she had known before. In a moment of silence, Aiden looked deeply at her, as if searching for something. "You know, Emily," he began hesitantly, "I don't know what the future holds, but sometimes I think about how certain people never really leave our lives, even when they seem far away." He smiled, and she felt the warmth of those words, understanding the subtle suggestion. She glanced away for a moment, smiling back, feeling strangely light. "Maybe some paths cross more than once," she said softly in response. When he held her hand, a gesture that lingered just a moment longer than necessary, Emily realized that connection was too strong to easily dissipate. As they said their goodbyes, Aiden watched her as if he hesitated to let her go. "Who knows, maybe New York still has some surprises in store for us," he said, with a light smile full of meaning. Emily laughed, but her quickened heartbeat revealed that there was more to it than just a casual remark. As he walked away, she felt that perhaps this wasn't truly the end.
At the end of this journey of encounters, separations, forgiveness, and transformation, Amelie and Aiden showed us that second chances can be a powerful way to rebuild ourselves. Sometimes, true new beginnings happen when we're able to forgive. Not only others, but also the past versions of ourselves that we still carry. This story revealed that by facing the scars of what we've been through, we can find peace and freedom. Even when separated, true connections have a unique way of staying with us, always ready for a new chapter. And you? What parts of the past do you need to let go of to allow a new beginning? What did you think of this story of resilience and fresh starts? Let us know in the comments. We love hearing your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. Hit the bell to get notifications, leave a like if this story touched your heart, and share your reflections in the comments. And click the end screen card to watch the next recommended video. Thank you so much for joining us, and see you in the next story.